Notice what happens when you walk into a room full of people you have never met before. Something begins almost immediately, quietly, and without any conscious decision to start it. You read the room. You notice who is speaking and who is listening, who takes up space easily and who adjusts themselves around others, who gets interrupted and who doesn't, who the eyes in the room move toward when something important is said. All of this happens quickly, naturally, and largely without effort. And by the time you have found somewhere to stand, you have already placed yourself somewhere in the invisible structure of the room. Nobody announced the hierarchy, nobody handed out a list. And yet everyone in the room is operating as though one exists. Because one does. It assembled itself in the first few minutes, out of glances and posture and the small negotiations of who defers to whom. This is what makes hierarchy so difficult to see clearly. It feels less like something that was constructed and more like something that was simply discovered. Like a natural feature of the landscape that was always going to be there. You feel it most sharply at the moments when your position in it shifts. The meeting where your idea is taken seriously for the first time and you notice how differently the room feels. The moment a new person arrives and the balance adjusts almost imperceptibly around them. The quiet discomfort of being in a room where your usual markers of status don't translate, where the things that place you clearly in one context mean very little in another. In those moments, something stirs. Not always dramatically, but consistently enough to suggest that wherever you are in a hierarchy, some part of you is always aware of it. What is worth noticing is how natural the awareness feels. Not constructed or chosen or socially imposed in any way that requires your agreement. Just there, the way hunger is there, or tiredness. A background signal that is almost always running, tracking position and proximity and the small shifts in who holds the room and who doesn't. Most people never examine this signal directly. They simply respond to it, adjusting, competing, deferring, asserting, without ever quite asking why it feels so automatic. Or why, when the hierarchy shifts in a direction that doesn't favor them, the discomfort is so immediate and so difficult to simply set aside. Carl Jung would not ask you why hierarchy exists. He would ask you why it feels so personal when your place in it changes. Because that is the thing about status. The moment it shifts, upward or downward, in a meeting or a social group or a relationship that has quietly reorganized itself, the response is immediate. Not just intellectual, something deeper moves. A discomfort that arrives before you have had time to think about it, a satisfaction that feels larger than the situation seems to warrant. Jung would recognize both of those reactions instantly. Not as vanity or weakness but as information about something much older than the room you are currently standing in. Jung believed that the human psyche carries patterns that were formed long before any individual life began. He called these archetypes, deep, inherited structures that shape how you respond to the world without you having to learn them from scratch. And hierarchy, in Jung's understanding, is one of the oldest patterns the psyche knows. The awareness of position, the instinct to read who holds power and who doesn't, the automatic adjustment of behavior in response to where you find yourself in the structure. These are not habits you picked up somewhere, they are closer to instincts. And instincts, Jung observed, do not respond well to being told they are irrational. What Jung would want you to sit with is what happens in the shadow when your status is threatened. Because the parts of yourself that hierarchy touches are not always the parts you are most comfortable acknowledging. The envy that arrives when someone moves above you, the quiet satisfaction when someone drops below. The need to be seen in a certain way by certain people, a need that feels embarrassing to admit directly, but that shapes behavior in ways that are very difficult to ignore once you start looking at them honestly. Jung noticed that the things we most need from others, recognition, respect, a confirmed place in the order of things, are also the things we are most reluctant to admit needing. And so the need goes into the shadow, where it continues to drive behavior without ever being examined. The person who insists they don't care about status is often the person whose shadow is most actively tracking it. Because what we push down doesn't disappear. It simply finds less visible ways to act. Status, in Jung's understanding, is not something that happens around you. It is something that happens inside you first. And the intensity of what you feel when it shifts is one of the most reliable measures of how much of your inner life it is quietly organizing. Friedrich Nietzsche had very little patience for the stories people tell about why they want what they want. And when it came to status, he was particularly precise. Because the desire for status, for position, for recognition, for the confirmation that you matter more than at least some of the people around you, is one of the desires that people are most creative about disguising. Even from themselves. The person climbing carefully and deliberately inside a hierarchy is rarely doing it, in their own telling, because they want to be above others. They are doing it because they are good at what they do, because they have something to contribute, because the position they are reaching for will allow them to make a difference in ways their current position doesn't permit. The story is always about something other than the wanting itself. About merit, about purpose, about the simple and reasonable desire to be placed where your abilities can do the most good. Nietzsche would listen to all of this with great patience and then ask a single question. What do you feel when someone less capable than you moves above you in the hierarchy? That feeling, whatever it is the honest answer. Not the story, the feeling. Nietzsche understood the will to power not as a desire to dominate in the crude sense, but as something more fundamental. A drive toward expansion, toward the confirmation of one's own significance, toward the feeling that you are not simply occupying space but mattering within it. And hierarchy, in that context, is not something imposed on human beings from outside. It is something human beings construct because they need it. Because position within a structure is one of the most available and legible ways of confirming that the will to power has found somewhere to land. What the story does, the story about merit and contribution and purpose, is make that need feel dignified. It translates a raw and deeply human drive into something that sounds considered and principled. And the translation is so smooth, so practiced, so consistently available, that most people never notice it is happening. They genuinely believe the story. Which is, Nietzsche would observe, precisely what makes it so effective. The discomfort arrives when the story is interrupted, when someone who doesn't fit the narrative of merit moves above you, when the hierarchy reshuffles in a way that the story cannot quite explain. In those moments, something surfaces that the careful language of contribution and purpose cannot fully contain. And that something, Nietzsche would suggest, is considerably more honest than anything the story was saying. René Girard noticed something about status that cut straight to the heart of why hierarchy feels so charged between people who are close to each other. It is not the person at the very top of the hierarchy that most people are watching most carefully. It is the person just above them. The colleague at the same level who got the recognition first, the friend whose life assembled itself into the shape yours was reaching for. Girard's observation was precise: we don't desire position in the abstract. We desire the position we see someone like us occupying, and the closer they are to us, the more intensely the desire burns. This is what Girard called mimetic desire. The wanting that is activated not by the thing itself but by watching someone similar want it first. And inside a hierarchy, this dynamic runs constantly and almost invisibly. People are not simply competing for resources or recognition, they are watching each other and imitating each other's desires without ever quite deciding to do so. The result is that hierarchies don't just organize people. They generate the wanting that keeps people organized within them. The structure produces the desire that maintains the structure. And the person inside it experiences all of this as their own authentic ambition rather than as something the hierarchy itself created in them. Niccolò Machiavelli would have recognized every detail of this and found it entirely unsurprising. He was not interested in why people desire status, he took that as a given. What interested him was how people navigate the hierarchy once they are inside it. And what he observed, with the cool and unsparing attention he was known for, is that hierarchy is never as stable as it appears. Beneath the visible order there is always movement. Quiet alliances forming and dissolving, reputations being carefully managed, information being shared with some people and withheld from others. Position being protected not just through performance, but through the patient and deliberate management of how you are perceived by the people, who have the power to move you up or push you out. Machiavelli would tell you that almost everyone inside a hierarchy is doing this, to some degree, whether they acknowledge it or not. The ones who insist they are simply doing good work, and letting it speak for itself are often the ones working hardest at the parts of the game they are least comfortable naming. What Girard and Machiavelli together point toward is something that is genuinely difficult to sit with. Hierarchy feels natural because it is natural. But natural does not mean neutral. The wanting it generates, the behavior it produces, and the stories it requires you to tell about yourself are worth looking at honestly. Because the structure that feels like the background of your life is also, quietly and consistently, shaping the foreground of who you are becoming inside it.